Okay, so no new content today, just a review, final exam review, and then a little bit of information about the schedule going forward, just clarifications here. So the timeline today, we're doing this final exam review. So if you've got questions, good time to bring them up. Tomorrow at 11:59 p.m. is when your 10-minute present video presentation should be uploaded. If you're having trouble sort of figuring out how to structure those, I recommend going into that assignment. I've added this week just a kind of a recommended structure of how things should flow. You can imagine that you can like one slide per bullet in the little bulleted list that I put there to give you just, again, if you already got something that works, then that's great. But if you're still having trouble figuring out how to put things together, then maybe take a look at that. But because we've got peer reviews that are assigned by Canvas, then I need all of the assignments in order for all the peer reviews to go out. But also because of how peer reviews are done on Canvas, the assignment will look like it's available. It technically will be available basically through the weekend, but that's just in order to facilitate the peer review. So it really does have a hard due date without a grace period of Wednesday at 11:59 p.m. so that you can get all of those in so that all the peer reviews can go out. So that's an important scheduling point there. And then those peer reviews, once they're assigned, you'll have them through Saturday in order to get those peer reviews done. So every individual student will be assigned a 10-minute presentation from another group. You'll watch that presentation, and then with the instructions that are on Canvas, you can get to a rubric that you can fill out and then leave a couple of constructive comments, and that's all you'll have to do for your peer review. Otherwise, Thursday of this week, so in 2 days, then that's technically when the stage one of the exam will be due. But I will release it sometime tonight, so that hopefully around midnight tonight, if I get it all finalized in time. So the goal is to have it available Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. But then I decided yesterday that rather than just giving the weekend off, because you do have all of this final project stuff due in the middle of the week, I'm just going to give you also Saturday and Sunday for stage one. So you'll have those 5 days for stage one, Wednesday, so tomorrow, Thursday and Friday, Saturday and Sunday. And then stage two, the collaborative one, will open up Monday. So it will technically say it is due on Tuesday, but you'll have all of finals week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday to get it done. So it will actually be available through Friday night of finals week, and stage one will be available until Sunday night of this weekend. So that's the schedule going forward. Any questions about that schedule? Yep. Uh-huh. Oh, good question. I don't require your faces to be in it. It's, if that helps with the presentation, I mean, sometimes it does make for a more compelling presentation. It's not required. I do think it's a great idea to record, using Zoom as opposed to you can just do audio overlays on top of a PowerPoint presentation. I see your question. I'll give you just a second. But but it tends to maybe again be a little more compelling video if you've got, rather than, sometimes the PowerPoint puts a weird gap in the audio in between slides, so it just doesn't make for a nice video. Either way, you want to upload a video and not an annotated PowerPoint or something like that. And then also there's no requirement that all 4 people in your group need to participate equally as much in the video. I understand in these groups, you might have some people that do more of one thing than another, and maybe somebody is more of a presentation specialist, and so that's fine too. So there's not you don't have to make sure that, we've got 10 minutes and we're going to divide it up 2.5 minutes each, and it's going to be very very tight to that schedule. Don't have to worry too much about that either. Question? The peer reviews will be open after I get all of the. So theoretically speaking, if everybody gets their presentations in by 11:59 on Wednesday night, then I'll hit the go button on the auto assign for the peer reviews, and then those peer reviews will be available immediately after that. But if I have to bug a few groups, so that then it may take a little bit of time. It's Canvas. If I assign peer reviews too early, it becomes really difficult to deal with how to deal with those few others that haven't submitted, so then haven't been assigned a peer review and haven't had a peer review assigned to them. So I really need to have all this. So that's why nominally the peer reviews will become available pretty much all of Thursday, all of Friday, and all of Saturday. Other questions about schedule? Okay. All right. So just shifting to the exam, very much like the midterm. So it's meant to fit within a midterm or with a normal class period time. So it's not longer than a midterm time. Stage one, you don't have to come here. So again, stage one will be open Wednesday for as long as unless I have an issue getting everything up to Canvas and resolving all of that. Theoretically, tonight at midnight, it will open, be available on Canvas. You'll take it via lockdown browser, so you can take it remotely. You don't have to come here, but Sean will be here Thursday during this time period. If you want to bring a laptop and take it in this room, just have a quiet space that's already on your schedule, and that's fine. You don't have to do that. So if nobody shows up here within the first 10 or 15 minutes, then Sean might leave. So and that's totally fine. Then likewise during finals week, there is a time period. It's on the Canvas calendar. I think it's like around 4 o'clock sometime. I forget the minute. But it's on the Canvas calendar. And then likewise, this room will be staffed. And so if you want to take the collaborative exam here, because it's all on your schedules and this room will be available, you can come in that Tuesday in the afternoon time that's on the Canvas calendar, but you don't have to. So you can completely take the stage to elsewhere. And then as a reminder, lockdown for stage one with one sheet of notes. It's one sheet. You can have it double-sided. It's hand produced, so it can be typed, just no screenshots. And then in stage two, it's collaborative, open notes, open Canvas, no lockdown, only collaborate with students currently enrolled in this class. You can use tools like Slack or Discord, but you just want to make sure that only people from this class are in that channel. So any questions about that format? So again, you don't have to come here for either stage. You can, but you don't have to. Okay. All right. And then the only other thing I want to say before we go into the final exam review topics here is if there were topics this semester that you enjoyed and you'd like to know a little bit more about that, what we've covered this semester is really just the tip of a much bigger iceberg. And there are other courses that go a little bit more in depth than we do. This has very much been a survey course. Because of Veterans Day, we didn't cover a lot of things that I wanted to cover. So that one lecture that we kind of missed, there's a bunch of little things in there about mutualisms and so on that there's a bunch of examples that, it's sad that we missed, but, it happens. So there is this, it is, like I said, a survey course. If you really like, for example, the social stuff, which we really only touch on very little in this class. Bio 436, which I think is offered in the spring, is a good course, is a good follow-on. It's really a behavioral ecology course focused entirely on social systems. And so that's a nice one. If you like the potential lab component, so like learning to do playback experiments, learning to do some of these chemical assays for chemical ecology, a bunch of these things, doing some neuroethology, a bunch of opportunities there. Bio 435 is a cool class where you actually get to do these things in the lab and in the field. And then really any organismal course there you can think about now through the lens of animal behavior. And so invert zoo, entomology, Vertzo. If you think about these in terms of Timbergen's 4 and how animals are interacting with the environment around them, behavioral ecology, then, these fit really nicely with this course as well. So if you're looking for other courses and you liked this topic, definitely recommend taking a look at these ones as follow-ons. All right, so any questions about, again, the administrative stuff? All right, so what we're going to do here now is um, if you don't, so I'm going to do a clicker, and anyone who does this clicker will get credit. Anyone who doesn't do this clicker will get an excused absence. So this is really your time, so there's no penalty for not coming today. So after this clicker question, if you don't feel like you want any review, you can. I won't hurt my feelings if you leave. So it's totally fine to stay here for the review, but I'm just giving this for those who showed up. If you want a little bit, it's a little better to get credit for attending than to get an excused absence for attending. But either way, there's no penalty for not attending the rest of today. So let me do this clicker. So just hit any answer. And so I'll just go ahead and leave that up. So clicker, any answer, A through E, multiple choice. All right, so the rest of these things, all I've done is I've taken highlights from all of the lectures after the midterm, and then highlights from all of the lectures before the midterm. The exam is, it is comprehensive. It goes over, everything in the semester, but really in the bottom half of the semester, we were using things that we learned in the top half of the semester to apply them to more sophisticated examples. So it's going to be biased towards the content from units E through J, but it's still going to involve those fundamental units from A through D. So all I've got here are highlights from each lecture that I can step through. And if you have a question as they come up, then you can raise a hand. If you have a question that isn't related to what's on the screen, you can raise a hand, or I can take questions now. If you don't have any, if this isn't helpful for you, then you don't need to be here. That's fine too. So are there any burning questions or topics that anyone would like me to go over or answer questions about before the final exam? The other thing is I can't, once the stage 1 or stage 2 are out, I can't answer any content questions because I won't, it'll be hard for me to tell if you've actually seen the exam or heard about the exam or not. So, today is the good time to give me any content questions today or this evening. So any questions? Yeah. Sure. Okay. So there's a question about hawk dove. Hawk dove, I might be able to jump to that. Just a second. That stag hunt, so should be just a little bit farther. Maybe I should let me just escape and search and then find it. All right, here we go. All right, so there's a question about the hawk dove game. Hawk dove is also another name for the game of chicken. So this is a game that you see in evolutionary biology when you have two strategies. One that is kind of an aggressive strategy so it's about resource holding potential and allocation of resources and in securing resources and taking resources from others. And so you have an aggressive strategy that when paired with a more submissive strategy, the dove, then all the resources will go to the aggressive. But when you have two of the kind of more submissive strategies that come together, the resources get split equally. So imagine there's 10 units of resource. So these are 10 food items, for example, 10 square meters of space in a territory. So if you've got the aggressive here against a submissive, then the aggressive will get all the resource, the submissive will get none. Two of these more submissive ones, they split them equally. But then if two aggressive ones come together, then they both end up losing out significantly because of all of the effort that they put in to securing this resource. So this extra contention here. So there's a very high cost to playing a hawk. So if you were a dove playing a hawk, you lose the resource. If you were a hawk playing a hawk, you actually go into deficit. So that's the hawk dove game. And so examples of this, whether you're a parasite or a host in a population, whether you produce or scrounge. So, producer scrounger game, you can imagine that the producer is the dove and the scrounger is the hawk. If all you have are scroungers, all you have are those trying to steal from others, then they're all going to lose out because no one will actually be producing anything. So that's why we would view them as hawks. And then, but then if they're all producers, that's fine. But then they're all going to be finding, they're competing for a limited amount of food that's available. So they have to split that amount of food on there. So this is like producer and scrounger. So there might be a mixture here where the scrounger ends up stealing from the producer, which is not great for the producer, but the producer, if they become a scrounger, it's maybe even worse because now if they're both scroungers, neither of them are going to get any food. So there's a bunch of scenarios in evolutionary biology and behavioral ecology which can be viewed as hawk-dove games. Fighting versus escaping, that's another one there. So when you have a hawk-dove game, when I show these little diagrams, and if anybody has trouble understanding these diagrams, then let me know. But what's trying to be in every box, if it wasn't clear, the top number is the payoff going to this player, the player that's across the top. And the number on the side here is the payoff going to this player. So that's how you're supposed to read these things. And so I've labeled these things with numbers just to make them more concrete, but also variables, letters. And as long as they have this relationship, it's a hawk-dove, where the amount that you win when you play against a dove is the highest, and then the amount that you split, if it's two doves, is the next, and the amount that you lose when you're the dove playing against the hawk is the next, and then the amount that you get if two aggressive hawks play against each other is the next. That's what defines a hawk-dove game. X is, again, just a variable that represents the amount that the payoff when two aggressive strategies fight each other. And so this is the worst outcome is when two hawks fight each other. The best outcome is when a hawk fights a dove. And so that's what defines a hawk-dove game. When you have a game that's defined like this WTLX relationship down here, then there are two Nash equilibrium. So that means that if it's only two players playing the game, if one of them has hawk thrust upon them and the other one has dove thrust upon them, so you're saying you're the hawk and you're the dove, then at that point, once they've agreed that we're going to start that way, I'll be hawk and you be dove, then there's no benefit for either of them to change their strategy. If you're playing hawk and the other one's playing dove, if the dove stays a dove, there's no benefit for hawk to switch to dove. Likewise, if the hawk is playing hawk and the dove is playing dove, there is no benefit for the dove to aggress and become a hawk, because then that's going to be worse off for the dove. So the best outcome is to just stick with wherever you started. So if you start here, you're going to stay there. If you start here, you're going to stay there. That's what it means to be a Nash equilibrium. But the thing here is that it's difficult to tell, it's difficult to figure out who's going to get to play hawk. So that's the key problem in a hawk-dove game. So if there are asymmetries in the environment that do what I just said, say you have to be hawk and you have to be dove. So this is like if you stop at a intersection, that the light is that asymmetry. Whoever gets to be green gets to play hawk. Whoever gets to sees red gets to play dove. and it's agreed upon. A third party has said that. If you're these stock-eyed flies that come and measure their stocks next to each other, the one with the bigger stock gets to play hawk, and the one with the smaller stock gets to play dove. It's decided. It's an asymmetry that is correlated with that. So that's how the roles get assigned there. But if you don't have that, if you have no idea who's going to be who has the bigger eye stock or who's got the green light, if there's none of that, then what happens in hawk dove games is across the population, you see what's called a mixed Nash, which means a certain fraction of the population will play hawk and another fraction of the population will play dove. And that fraction will be determined by exactly what these rewards are. And that's exactly the producer scrounger outcome that we saw. So we said when you put birds together based on what the rewards are in the arena, based on how sweet the rewards are, how much extra benefit you get for being a producer, how much you can steal by being a scrounger, then that's going to change how many producers and scroungers you have in an arena. And what you're doing is you're changing the fraction of hawks and doves. Because like I said, it's never beneficial to have all hawks because they just fight each other and everybody gets a negative all the time. So when you have a population of all hawks, eventually someone just goes dove because it's better to get a 0 than it is to get a -5. But then likewise, you're never going to have all doves because then there's a pressure for one of those doves to stop looking for its own food and to muscle another dove out of food. That ends up being more beneficial. So when there is no other way to break the symmetry, you get a fraction of hawks and a fraction of doves. That's one of the key things that comes out of that. And so that's an example of negative frequency dependent selection. So when a population has too much of one strategy, it becomes beneficial to be the other strategy. And that strategy grows and the other strategy shrinks. And then eventually you'll go the other way, that once the strategy that was in excess, it will then be in deficit and it'll go the other way. And when this happens, you'll frequently see either the system just balances at exactly 65% one strategy and 35% the other, or you'll get oscillations around that balance. And that's what we saw with the fish, when there was that host parasite example where the parasite could either have a left mouth or a right mouth, and the host that it was getting its scales eaten off of it could either have a tendency to look left or to look right. Then you saw these two things go back and forth, and they would oscillate around a 50-50 equilibrium. And that was this negative frequency dependent selection. So this hawk dove is a conceptual tool that helps us think about all of these types of problems like that host parasite interaction and why you might see oscillations. Those oscillations are kind of predicted by the hawk dove. Any questions about that? Is that a question? Well, it's not. So these are net numbers. So about efficiency, they're kind of counted into the numbers. So if you are using up a lot of energy as being a hawk, that's going to be counted into your reward of being a hawk because whatever benefits you get, you have to subtract off your metabolic costs. And then whatever's left over, that's the benefit to being a hawk. And that's what the numbers that are up here. So this is saying that at the end of the day, how much do you get by, on average, what reward did you get by walking around and hawking all day or by doving all day? And this is saying that at the end of the day, if you played a lot of doves, then you're going to get W benefit from that as a hawk. If you instead were a dove and you played a lot of doves, you're going to get T benefit for that, and so on. So it's the W is it's generally saying that hawks against doves is the best outcome individually, and doves against doves is the second best outcome, and then doves against hawks is the third best outcome, and hawks against hawks is the fourth best outcome. So really, this is more about which pairing would you rather be in. And so I would rather be a hawk against a dove. But if that means playing but if there's so many hawks out there that it's more likely for me to be a hawk against a hawk, then I might consider switching to dove. Because if there's a bunch of hawks out there, me playing hawk almost guarantees I'm going to be in the X case. And so in that case, I'd rather be in the L case. I'm sorry, say it again. Yeah, that's how the frequencies will change. Yeah, is that you can think of these as fitnesses. And so if you manage to be getting this payoff, then it looks really good to be a hawk. But what that means is there's going to be more hawks. And so over time, you'll get more hawks trying to get this fitness because fitness is basically offspring. So if you have, if playing a hawk gives you this much fitness, then soon there was going to be a lot of hawks. And so this can play over generational timescales, or in the case of producer scrounger, over life history timescales. And so either way, you started out with a few hawks, you're going to get lots of hawks. But once you have lots of hawks, then each one of those hawks is much more likely to receive this penalty way down here. And at that point, it's the worst thing you can be is a hawk. And so then you're going to see more doves come into play. And those doves are either going to get one of these two payoffs, which are better than this. But then once you get lots and lots of doves, then it will become then more beneficial to be a hawk again, and it'll go back and forth. Other questions? I can go back to the start just as a reminder of where, and none of the questions online. Okay. All right. Yeah, so that links.asu.edu/bio331 questions. If you're shy and you do want to ask a question, but you just wanted to be anonymous, if you go to that, links.asu.edu/bio331 questions, then you can feel free and Sean will read off your question without your ID. All right, so I'll go back to the start just to remind us where we started after the midterm. So we started in movement. So at each one of these, if you go through this slide deck that's online, each one starts with the learning outcomes. So when I build the exam, I basically go to these learning outcomes at the top of these study guides, and I say, okay, I need some questions from Unit E. Can I look across these learning outcomes and create 2 or 3 questions that address a subset of these learning outcomes? So if you study the learning outcomes, that's a good way to prepare for the exam. So each study guide starts with the learning outcomes, then it shows the lectures and each one of the terms here. And then I then put the terms right up top in each one of the lectures. So these are all the things we covered in that first lecture, E1. So just as a reminder, we talked about homing. We talked about orientation. So how animals end up turning their bodies in order to go from place to place. We talked about path integration. So when animals use internal cues to try to keep track of how far they've moved and where their original location was so they can get back to it. We talked about directional and random motion, how an animal might switch between the two, where random motion is good for searching, but then eventually fleeing, it's good to have directional motion because it gets you out of exposure more quickly. We talked about these, in search, for example, you can have different types of randomness. So you can have roughly a straight line that then gets interrupted by these tight turns. So this is what's called a levee flight. Levee walk or levee flight. So this is a common pattern we think a lot of animals use. We talked about these kineses. So, remember that kineses or kinesis is a change in speed without orientation. So you can either change how you're turning or you can just run in a random direction. So if you turn on the lights and there's some cockroaches that then run in a random direction, they're not running necessarily away from the light, they're just running. And so that is an example, ortho, when you talk about your bones, ortho, straight. So straight kinesis, just running in a straight line, versus clinokinesis, so how you're turning. So you might start turning more or less, but you're not turning toward anything. Once you involve actual directed motion towards something, then we talk about taxis or taxis. So changes in direction that are oriented to a stimulus source. That doesn't mean always going toward it. It could be going away. So positive and negative, are you going toward the stimulus or away from the stimulus? And we said that there are, movement. You can have oriented like clinokinesis, turning that's oriented toward a stimulus or away, but you can also have a point between two stimuli. So you've got two light sources, and you go to the middle in between them. You've got telotaxis, so movement toward the larger of two stimuli. So comparison. So different movement options. And in either one, you can have sort of positive and negative. So you can be moving toward the middle point between two light sources or away. So we might modify those with positive and negative. And that's, sometimes we name the stimuli. So the stimuli could be wind, chemical, gravitational, and so on. So there's photo and scoto. So they're very similar, but one, you're actually a light source is the stimulus, and you're either running away from it or toward it. Whereas scoto, so you might have scototaxis, is you're actually it's almost like the dark source is the stimulus and you're running toward it or away from it, typically toward it. So, it might be that, once that cockroach finds a dark area, it then starts going towards the dark area. But initially, it just runs in a random direction. So, just some terms. Navigation, that's actually moving from place to place. Triangulation, identifying the signal. There's different ways of triangulating. You can have triangulation based on two sensors that are on you, or by moving your head around. We talked about using idiothetic information and allothetic information, so information on the outside or information on the inside. And use these ant odometers as an example of idiothetic. So if you're counting steps internally, then that's idiothetic information. If you're just looking for signposts externally and moving to them, that's allothetic information. So a lot of terminology that we use in that. Any questions about any of that? Okay. We talked about homing in that unit. So this kind of was, other ways in which animals find their way along a path. So, cataglyphis, that was that example where they do the step counters. We talked, that we sort of did a deeper dive into path integration and the so-called home vector, that animals that path integrate, they keep a home vector in their head that's always pointing home, and it always keeps the direction and distance in their head. And that's an example of idiothetic information. And some people bin this into cognition because you have to maintain this mental state, which there's no other way to explain the behavior aside assuming that this mental state actually exists inside the animal's head somewhere. So yeah, and this is just sort of going into that. Idiothetic information. So step counting was one example, but another common example you should know about is visual odometry. So not just actually counting steps, but actually keeping track of how much flow is going by. So that's another way to keep track of distance. Bees, spiders, a bunch of other animals are known to do that. And then there are less obvious examples that are clearly this, but at least another hypothesis is the integration of effort. So the idea that how strenuous it is to move in one direction, or how much energy you've used up, might give you an indication of how far you've walked. So that's another possibility. So, but just in general, different ways of telling how far you've walked, which is important to a bunch of animals. There's different allothetic information sources. So landmarks we talked about. We said that not only landmarks, but snapshot orientation. So that's a case where you're using the image and not specific landmarks. And so that's a way that you don't have to keep things in your head. Well, you have to memorize what things look like, but you're not keeping track of distances. You're using targets and memories of targets. So, things like that. We talked about how animals, some of them perceive magnetic fields just as with just as much fidelity as we perceive things in the visual space. So it's almost like they can see magnetic maps as opposed to other animals that just use compass information. So different ways that animals can find their place in the world and make their way from place to place. And then also celestial cues using the stars or the position of the sun. And that also gives you a helpful, landmark really that you can use. And then those all integrate together. And so there's some great examples of complex cognitive maps that are maintained by some animals. It's unclear whether all of them use the same sort of mechanism. So a huge diversity in these tools that allow animals to do these things. But regardless of whether you're using cognitive maps or whether they're small animals or large animals, they all, a wide variety of animals can travel very long distances through migration. So we talked about migration and how that's different than homing. We talked about dispersal, where you don't necessarily need to come back home. And so in dispersal, the movement, you're less interested in how they're moving and more interested in who's moving. So that's what we're talking about there. All right, any questions about movement or anything else that's come up? And again, if this is not helpful, you don't have to sit here and doze off. You can feel you don't. I'm not keeping you. There's no other clicker questions. Uh-huh. Okay. Yep. So marginal value theorem is an excellent place to start. So a big part of the marginal value theorem, this underlies the marginal value theorem. This balancing act here is that an animal, when foraging is important to an animal because animals need an energy source. In order to get an energy source, animals who are animated have to move to get it. But while they're moving around getting their energy, they can't do anything else. So the key thing that will be underlie why the marginal value theorem works is that an animal is not only trying to bring in as much energy as it can, but in as little time as possible. So that's why we often assume that animals do behaviors that are consistent with maximizing the rate of energy gain, not raw energy. So they're not maximizing calories possible, because then otherwise they'd just be eating all the time. They're making choices that provide the biggest calorie intake for that time investment. Because whatever they're investing in foraging, they can't invest in keeping themselves safe or finding mates or reproducing and so on. So that is one key thing, that balance between gain and time. And so we talked about how that led to, and again, this will lead up to the marginal value theorem, things like this Holling's disk equation, which is a way that captures this idea of rate of gain and how it can vary with the time it takes to handle prey items, as well as how available those prey items are. So how fast you can move, how many prey items are around, and how much time it takes to actually handle each one of those prey items. So that is going to affect your rate of gain. And so decisions will be made that will be responsive to density. Those decisions might be about your speed or responsive to your speed. And those decisions also are going to be responsive to how much handling time that you're going to take to process those. And so we gave the marginal value theorem was under this context of when you have patches of prey, that in this case, the investment decision is how much time do I spend in every patch, given that I could be spending that time going to another patch. So this is very much the decision a lot of you are sitting in here making. You're saying, how much benefit am I getting from sitting here right now? Given that he said there's absolutely no reason why, like, you should feel free to not leave if you've got other better things to do. Well, it's the same thing here. Like, if you're gaining something from sitting here, that's great, and then you can stay in this flower. But at the point where the gains you're getting, you feel like, I'm just not, this is all stuff that feels familiar to me. I'm not getting much out of it. Then at some point you decide to leave and go to some other spot where you can spend your time instead. So how much time you spend here depends not only on the rewards you're getting here, but the potential rewards you might get elsewhere. And that's going to be the key thing about the marginal value theorem. So, every one of these patches, the idea is you go into the patch, and, in this particular case, maybe the beginning, you get a lot of useful info about when the exam is going to be released and so on and so forth. But the longer you stay in here and listen to me drone on, then there's less information per unit time that's new to you, that's helpful. And so it levels off. And so if you stay here for the whole 75 minutes, then, you don't get, what you might expect to be 75 minutes worth of good information. You might only get like 30 minutes of good information because the amount of information per unit time goes down over time. So it's very helpful early, it's less helpful late. So then you have to decide, at what point do you stop gaining information here and go elsewhere? And I say information, and it turns out that there are people at Xerox PARC initially, 20, 30 years ago, that took all of these models that the behavioral ecologists were using. And when the web was first coming up, when search engines were just starting to come up, then they were trying to predict what's going to happen with how much time people spend on web pages as search engines get better and better. And they viewed that as a foraging problem, where if the search engine's terrible, you're going to spend a lot of time on each web page. But as the search engine gets better, then you're going to spend less time on each web page. And so they predicted how much time people would spend on web pages using the marginal value theorem that they got from foraging theory. And that's so-called information foraging theory, or IFT, just FYI. So the idea here, we have these diminishing marginal returns. So how do you decide the balance between early rewards that are very high rate and low rate of rewards later? How do you decide when to leave? And so that's where this marginal value theorem comes up. So as a reminder, this blue bent curve here, those are the rewards you get from a single patch. So there's a single patch in the environment, and so this is the gain in calories you're getting as you stay a little bit longer in a single patch. But then the average gain you get from an environment full of those patches happens to be equal to the line that is anchored at the time in between patches. So this SA, that's an environment where the patches are very close together. And this SC is an environment where the patches are very far apart. So if you take a line and you anchor them at the time it takes to get between patches, and then you let that line fall until it's tangent to this curve, then what the slope of this purple line gives you is the rate of gain in the maximal rate of gain in the environment. And so this is telling you that if you're in an environment where this patch, this blue patch, there are a bunch of these and they're all separated by this amount of time, then you shouldn't stay any longer than this A time in that patch. But as you spread those patches out, it becomes harder to find those alternative energy sources. So you use the ones that you do find more. And so as you spread those patches out, you then spend more time in each individual patch. So you go from spending A time in that patch to B time in that patch, and so on. So as things get poorer, you spend longer times in each patch. Question? What if there was a question like this on the final? it would be phrased in terms, not in terms of the math exactly, but in terms of the qualitative directions and concepts. So I might ask you, like, imagine if and I see your question now. Imagine if you had a bunch of patches and there was a process went through and an environmental process or maybe a construction or something like that, and it created a much sparser environment. Then I might say, what would you expect in terms of how long animals would spend in each patch? And then you would have to recall that, well, the marginal value theorem would tell me that if the environment is getting sparser, then I would expect to spend a longer time in each patch. So I'm not looking for, I mean, I might show you a graph like this, and I might ask you, like which point, like I might not show you these purple lines, but I might show you this blue line and these three dots. And I might then say, which point would correspond to the optimal residence time in the poorest environment? And you'd have to know that, oh, that's this one. And I have, I think on the next slide here, yeah, so this is also generalized for different types of patch in the same environment. So you've got a rich patch, an okay patch, and a poor patch, a bunch of those patches coexisting in the same environment. And the idea here is that they leave the patch at the same marginal value, but because the rich patch keeps its marginal value higher for longer, you spend more time in the richest patch. And so I might also say something like that. Like, imagine if you have a really strong patch that has a lot of berries in it and a patch that you deplete all the berries after a short amount of time. Under what conditions would you expect to spend more time in one over another, or something like that? Question? Well, so you have to sort of, if the, you have to sort of hold everything equal and ask those one at a time. So if you're in an environment and you make that environment poorer, then you're going to spend time in every patch longer. And you might start going into patches that you didn't visit before. If then, if you instead, if you're in that scenario or you're in the original scenario and you make a patch poorer, but you leave the environment alone, then you're going to spend less time in that patch that you've made poorer. But if you make all patches poorer, you're simultaneously making the environment poorer. So in that case, if you're making all patches poorer, then it's hard to predict exactly where you're going to land, but the two effects start to kind of cancel each other out. So it is going to change the optimal residence time, but it's not going to be, it'll be relatively minor. So like if this is the only, if this patch is the only game in town and you make, or if I go back to when there's only one patch, if I take this patch and I make it poorer, but then I also make them spread apart more. So making this patch poorer, I end up spending, if I just make this patch, that's kind of that's kind of that example, that if I only have one patch, it's this diagram. And if I make this line go down, like become much shallower, then that is going to push my residence time out. And then if I also make them spread apart even more, that's going to make me spend even more time in them. So it's kind of like if it's a really, really bad environment, if you happen across a patch, even if it's a patch that's like in good times would be a terrible patch, you might spend a very, very long time in it because it's very unlikely you're going to find another patch. Yeah, once they're closer together, you give up on patches early because it's just a better use of your time to search rather than staying in the patch. Yep. It's an investment choice. Do I invest more in search or do I invest more in exploitation? Exploration or exploitation? It's like investing in stocks. Do I invest more in this stock or in this stock? And you have a portfolio that's balanced between the two. And the animals are balancing their search portfolio against their exploitation. Yep, fine. IFD, the ideal free distribution. Hmm. Right. That's the ideal free distribution. And it basically is when you have ducks that all follow the marginal value theorem, but you put them in a pond together, then they distribute according to the ideal free distribution. So the ducks are kind of choosing a residence time between like breadcrumbs here and breadcrumbs there. And so they're trying to maximize their rate of gain, and that's going to be consistent with the MVT. But then as you see the ducks moving around, you get a game theoretic equilibrium that emerges. And then that's going to say that, well, overall, you'll get 4 ducks here and, 10 ducks here because this one has more breadcrumbs. All of the 14 ducks will end up seeing the same rate of return, the kind of this purple line. But they're now, it's almost like this blue curve is being determined not only by the patch, but the number of ducks also trying to eat in the patch simultaneously. So there's like this weird dynamic thing going on. But that's the ideal free distribution, which was in the social foraging unit, which was just like a couple lectures after that. So that was like here, the ducks in the pond, habitat choice. So the idea here is you have interference or scramble competition. So you don't have enough food to feed them all. So they have to move around the environment to find food. And you end up getting this curve here where this is now we're not plotting time, we're plotting the number of individuals in each patch against the intake rate per individual. And so we see in a rich patch, if it happens to be the only individual there, it gets a lot of food, and that's better than the poor patch. But when you have both patches there simultaneously, and you have, in this case, 6 foragers, then those 6 foragers spread out between those 2 patches. So you get 4 in the rich patch and 2 in the poor patch. But overall, even though the 4 are in the rich patch, they're all not stealing from each other, but they're preventing each other from realizing the rich gains of it. So there's no benefit to being in the poor patch or the rich patch because there's so many more in the poor patch. IFD. Does that answer your question? Any other questions related or not to this? Let's trigger any questions. I don't know if I had anything else about the IFD that, I think I was just saying, so we call those suitability functions. And we say that as you add population into the IFD, then this line goes down and it changes the rate of return to each individual. So you get more and more in each patch, but they're actually getting less and less. So it's related to the tragedy of the commons in that, as more start exploiting, then it reduces the benefit to all of them. Yeah. Any other questions about that or other things? So, and then I guess I mentioned on the next slide here that the IFD is the social version of the matching law. So if you put a marginal value forager in a box, like a Skinner box, and it chooses between these 2 options, which are almost like prey options, then it will spend a greater portion of its time with the button that gives it a greater reward rate. And so the time that an individual splits between 2 options for rewards is the single animal version of the IFD. So you put a bunch of these Skinner box matching law foragers that you might learn about in a psychology class. You put them together in a room and see how they assort around rewards in the room, and you'll get an IFD out. So the IFD is the social generalization of the matching law in psychology. Okay. Yeah, all right. So IFD stuff. Okay. Any other questions? So we're about to start in foraging a second ago. So the way that things went is we had foraging, we had social foraging, and then we went into mate selection. We talked about aggression, and then we landed in just social behavior in general. So that was the pattern there. I guess since we talked about the marginal value theorem, maybe I'll also remind us of the prey model. So this is like when you've got discrete prey, instead of choosing time, you're choosing, if I go back to the setup here, if I have a bunch of prey items like this, so I've got a bunch of prey items like this. The forager shows up and then and then is moving through the environment. It will ignore some things. It will choose to forage on others. Each one of them has a certain number of calories. But in order to get those calories, you have to pay that exact handling time. You can't pay less than it. You can't pay more than it. And so it's moving around and deciding which things to ignore and eat and take the time to eat it, and which ones, to process, and which ones to ignore, to pass up and not pay that handling time. So which ones do you pick? And that was the prey model, which is like the discrete version of the marginal value theorem. So it's this idea that that the Holling's disk equation serves as a barrier that separates the prey that you eat from the prey that you don't. So you've got a benefit from each prey, a handling time for each prey. If you sort them all by their benefit over cost, by the calories per time handling, then you're going to find that the rate of gain from the environment, if you can do better than the environment's giving you, you should eat it. If it's worse than the environment's giving you, then you should not. So then that sets up this natural ordering of profitabilities. And so this has a marginal value theorem like feel, because if you make the environment poorer, so if you space them out more, just like spacing out the patches, then this return you're getting from the whole environment, from all of your foraging per unit time, is going to get lower. And as it gets lower, you start eating more types of things. But if you space them close together, so it becomes very easy to find these high profitability types, then your rate of return per unit time from the whole environment gets better. It gets a richer environment. And as it gets richer, you start to specialize more. So in the patch model, that meant you only spend time in the richest patches. All the poorest patches you leave almost immediately. In the prey model, that means you specialize only on the highest profitability prey, and the low profitability prey you ignore. So it's just like the marginal value theorem. So that's the prey model. Any questions about the prey model? I mean, key things to remember about the prey model is only the encounter rates with the things in your diet matter, not the encounter rates of the things outside your diet. And the prey model without constraints predicts a 0-1 rule where you eat these 100% of the time and you eat those 0% of the time. Once you start adding constraints, then it gets a little complicated. And those are the more generalizations of the prey model. But this is the basic prey model, was just predicts all in and all out. So that's an important one to remember. Anything else that's, yeah. Yep. So I'll just do that example from Trivers. So that is going to be one of our recent. Oh, I went too far. Went into the pre-midterm. So let me just find Trivers, the second version. Okay, this will do. All right, so I guess I'll go back and forth here. So the problem that we're trying to solve is, yeah, okay, I guess in these I just sort of jump in. So the problem we're trying to solve is you've got a parent that can choose to feed its current offspring, so at some level. So it's providing this much milk or this much crop or whatever, these many worms to its current offspring. And if it provides more food to its current offspring, then there's a higher probability that those offspring will survive to reproduce themselves. So it will bring higher fitness to the parent. But there's a cost because with every little bit of effort that the parent invests in the current offspring, it may reduce the amount of resources available for future offspring. So if we view it from the parent's perspective, then we have this fitness gain from the current offspring based on the amount of food being provided. So if you double the amount of food, you don't quite double the number of offspring, but because it starts to diminish in returns, but at least initially, that's how it works out. You double the amount of food, you double the amount of offspring that survive to reproduce themselves. But what is linear is if you double the amount of food fed to the current offspring, you also double the cost in the lost offspring in the future because you've used those resources for the current offspring. So the parent is dealing with these two lines here, where these two lines here represent you want to maximize the difference between these two lines, which would be this point right here. The conflict comes with the offspring. And so to the offspring's perspective, then the offspring are 100% related to themselves. So if we go back and we think about Hamilton's rule, it tells us when to expect helping behavior. And we would expect helping behavior when the relatedness to the one benefiting from the helping behavior times the fitness benefit of helping is greater than the relatedness to the one that is losing out times how much fitness they're losing out on. And so in the case of the parent, then both of these are 0.5 because the one benefiting is half related to them, their current offspring. But their future offspring are also 0.5 related to each other or related to the parent. So in that case, you've got a 0.5 in both cases here. And so it will just end up being that the parent should feed so long as the fitness benefit, the rate of change of the fitness benefit, the slope of the fitness benefit is greater than the slope of the cost. And so that is what we see for the parent here. So long as this slope, which is very steep, is greater than this slope, then the parent should keep feeding. But at the point where this slope, which is this dashed line here, becomes equal to this slope, the parent should stop feeding. That's what we'd expect from the parent's perspective. The conflict comes if we go back to this Hamilton's rule. Now, if we think about from the offspring's perspective, they're 100% related to themselves. So this RB is 1. So any extra food they get, that benefit is going to benefit them and only their genes. And so but the cost, they do feel the cost. Their genes feel the cost because those genes that are in these offspring, there is some probability they'll be in future offspring too. So if you invest too much in current offspring, then it may end up costing too much in terms of future offspring from the genes perspective. But from that genes perspective, there's a 100% chance the genes are here in the offspring, only a 50% chance that those same genes will be in future offspring. So that's where you get the conflict is this now in the parent, this was 0.5, this was 0.5, they both canceled out. In the offspring, this is 1, but this is 0.5 because you're half related to your siblings. So if you've ever had to do these calculations, if you look at a pedigree, then every time you go down a line of a pedigree, you basically have a quarter, you end up multiplying by a half. So there's like a half probably every time you go in a diploid organisms, then every time you go down one of those lines in a pedigree, you end up having a half chance that those genes will come with you down that line. So when you go up to mom, there's a half chance that you're related to mom. And then there's if you go from mom down to offspring to other offspring, there's another half. So that's a quarter chance through the mom path. But you also have the dad path. So then you got a half up to dad and a half down to the offspring. So those add together those two quarters into a half. So you are half related to your full sibling, which means that the genes in you, any in one particular gene in you, there's a 50% chance it's also in your offspring. And so that shows up as a 0.5 here, even though you got a 1.0 here. And so that is a different expression. That ends up being this lower line down here. So now we've got 0.5 times the cost to future offspring. And if you're trying to maximize that, so if you're trying to maximize the difference between this lower line and this upper blue line, then now you've got the optimal choice would be here. So from the offspring's perspective, you should feed this much. So from the genes in the offspring are going to maximize their fitness if they can manage to get this much food. But the genes in the parent are going to maximize their fitness if they can get this, if they feed this much food. And so this in between here is where you've got parent-offspring genetic conflict. So in the region before this, you've got a mutualism. It benefits both parent and offspring to signal for the offspring to signal when they're hungry and for the parent to feed the hungry offspring. So this is where begging behavior evolves. If an offspring can signal to a parent that it is starving and it needs food, the parent will benefit from listening to that signal and responding with food. That evolution happens in this region here. But at some point, you're going to get to a point where the offspring has reached a certain level of satiation. It isn't quite fully satiated maybe, but it's gotten kind of enough. And so the parent will have its genes are going to look for a way to stop feeding here, to be able to detect that its offspring have gotten enough food. But the genes in the offspring are going to express additional begging behavior to try to trick the parent into feeding it more. And that conflict sets up an arms race between the parent and the offspring. And that's what leads to that so-called overbegging, which I think I've got that picture of here. So that's the idea here, is that it's overbegging because it ceases to be a mutually beneficial signal in this region. Does that answer questions? Other questions? We've got only a couple minutes left. And you can do similar analysis when you think about any type of conflict, sibling-sibling conflict, parent-parent conflict. I mentioned infanticide and a lot of biparental care. You get infanticide, you can analyze that. P is parent and O is offspring. So this is so P sub P. Yeah. So, oh, right. So that's hidden behind there. This P here is this is just the amount of parent investment. So this is P for parental investment. So this is a lot of parental investment, and this is parental neglect. No parental investment. And so this is the optimal amount of parental investment from the parent's perspective. This is the optimal amount of parental investment from the offspring's perspective. That's right. Other questions? Okay. We've got like a minute left. So, I can't keep you any longer than 4:15. If you do have any other questions, feel free to email me or the TAs. Sean and Anushka's out of town, but I think she'd still be around. And I can't answer questions, or at least we can't answer questions about content after tonight, because once the exam's out there, I don't know how much information you might have absorbed socially about the exam. So if you do have any questions that are still bothering you, please reach out tonight and I'll get back to you. I might get back to you tomorrow, but and then the exam should go up tonight, barring some Canvas technical glitch. Okay. Well, in case this is the last time I see you, have a nice break. and, you know, keep your interest in animal behavior.